Hello and welcome to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. I'm Sam Mickey, and this week I'm really excited to welcome onto our show André Daughtry. André, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Appreciate it.
Just a little bio for who you are, what you do. You are a speculative social documentarian. I think that's a very cool title. We need to hear more about what that means. Um, and I should say award-winning speculative social documentarian. That's important. And you're exploring contemporary expressions and experiences of things like the spiritual, mystical, theological dimensions of life, specifically in the context of pluralistic democracies. I know you also describe your current project, Wilderness, as engaging an integral ecological approach to these kind of issues, so the intersection of sustainability and spirituality. So this project Wilderness, you have a kind of early sketch of it called Sketches for Wilderness, and that just premiered in the middle of August. And I watched it, blown away. Really excited to talk to you more about that project. And we've known each other for a few years now. And I think maybe the first time we met was through the American Academy of Religion, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so it's been just a delight to kind of get to know you, get to know your work, because I always find it really exciting when people are working at the intersections of so many of these things, religion, ecology, sustainability, and expressing it artistically. So thanks for being here. Cool work. First thing I got to hear about, what is Sketches for Wilderness? And I'll have a link for people to check it out themselves.
Cool, cool. Yes, so I moved to Colombia, South America last year. I've been planning this move for a couple of years now. I'm very interested in uh, the energy of ecological awareness, but also that have with me having a bit of an issue of what it is that I'm seeing as far as, for lack of a better word, kind of a messianic approach that technology itself is going to be the thing that saves us, saves the planet, helps us do things better. So for me, my investigation of moving to Colombia, I have an apartment here in Medellin, but I also spend the other half of my time in the department of Cauca in a small little town, 9,200 feet above sea level called Sylvia.
Hmm.
And that is where the reservation for the Misak indigenous tribe live. And so my interest was, how do we possibly learn from indigenous peoples who have traditions that are just not anthropocentric at all, really.
Right. Right.
And so really seeing, the subjectivity or subjecthood of nature,
Mhm.
of rocks and animals, flora, fauna, everything that we actually share existence with and are interdependent on for our existence. What's it like to have a tradition that has a different take on what that actual relationship is? So I started out with the title Wilderness in my head. I usually have a big
Mhm.
title. So if anyone gets a chance to see my films, it's a one word title or two words, and it's in all caps. And so when I was at American Academy of Religion a couple of years back, I went to a session on the concept of wilderness from the perspective of the Old Testament.
Mm.
And I just love the conversation because it really is what we're dealing with when we're talking about known and unknown. Being an artist, part of our job is to kind of be on the edge of what is already organized and what is not organized so that we can actually kind of bring organization through vision, hopefully,
Mm.
of better ways of seeing how things are actually connecting. So my own walk as an artist, leaving the country to live with an indigenous tribe, all of these things brought the word wilderness to me, and Sketches of Wilderness is basically when you're doing a visit to an artist's studio when they're doing their preliminary sketches, if they're a painter or the preliminary moldings, if they're a sculptor. For me, as a photographer and time-based media artist, the opportunity came to me from a shout out to Jeff Arnold at
Mm.
Black Mountain College Art Museum and Art Center to help me along with a little commission to actually put sketches for Wilderness together, which is a 34-minute film of my impressions of directions that I would like to go while working on my way towards the larger project that I'm seeing called
Right.
Wilderness.
Right. Yeah, it's such a cool project. I mean, it's and real stunning uh, work with the lenses. I was just, really kind of enchanted and entranced watching it, and had to remind myself, like, oh, I should be taking notes. I'm going to be talking to Andre soon about this. I was just like,
Yeah,
oh, wow, this is cool. So I wonder if you could say a little more about the specifics of working, being a lens-based artist. And especially some of the shots in here, the kind of aerial shots. I was like, wait, is this a drone? How are you getting some of this? And
yeah.
yeah, really, it's just so fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up a musician because my mother is a classically trained singer, so I thought I was going to be a
Oh,
musician, and I am. I actually make. I didn't do it for this film, but I like make a lot of the music for my projects. But I picked up a camera when I was 18, my freshman year of college, and I really, really took to, yeah, this other feeling. I know Kanye West is not the most famous or popular name to say, maybe it's even infamous, but I remember, Kanye West was a visual artist, and they said he wanted his paintings to be louder. He wanted to do something louder. And I actually went the opposite way. I was a drummer, so I used to play in punk bands, hardcore, jazz,
uh,
all of that. And then I actually, when I picked up the camera, I found that it was actually something more meditative and calmer.
mm,
And so I went that way where, yeah, what's it like to sit with something and then to be moved in a stirring way, but not just body movement, but like everything being moved at a certain time. And so I know the musicians can argue with what it is that I just said, but I went the other way and I said, I don't know, I like those Ozu films. Like it looks like
mm,
nothing's moving for an hour and a half. And I started to go in that direction. So for me, being a lens-based artist is meditative. And because I'm interdisciplinary between time-based and still photography, I'm always having the conversations about what one does that the other doesn't, and vice versa. But then how do they work in conjunction
right.
with each other? So for me, that's what's important about being a lens based artist because what we use the lens for is so ubiquitous. And so I love having the conversation between those two strong mediums of still photography and moving images. And then the next element of what I love about being lens based artist is the let's say the ideological trappings of lens based or photography being like a objective truth
Mm,
conveyor, like a conveyor of like objective neutral truth.
right.
And I love playing with that as well, because the reality is yes, the microscope helped us be able to learn about microbes. The telescope in many ways helped us be able to see our position in the galaxy, in the universe.
Right.
We go around the sun, not the other way around. But then lens-based technologies also bring us intangible things like love,
Mm,
like senses of community, care. That's why we go to the movies. So
right.
we're moved by these intangible aspects of life, also very, very strongly by the actual lens medium itself. So that gets into my love of technology, but then how technology is still a part of us, but it's also a part of the tangible and intangible aspects of what our experiences are as well.
Nice. I like that a lot. I've never really thought about the fact that like the telescope isn't that different than a movie camera in the sense, of working with lenses. And I think no, it's just same thing. Just like we have these revelatory experiences, through a microscope or telescope, through a camera lens as well. That's a really I like that. That's a great analogy. Um, well, and so what you're presenting then, what you're showing us is to some extent like a love story
Mm.
with land.
Mm.
And geez, just the beautiful shots. I mean, I've never been to Colombia, but you can almost just smell the land through I mean, it's just so lush and so, dense greenery, and then the communities, you can tell people are living in very harmonious relationships with land. Uh, so I want to hear more about what you mean by wilderness because, like the old Wilderness Act is like, it's the opposite of humans. It's a place where no humans are. And obviously this wilderness, not at all. And so you're overcoming the limits of the old, you know, anthropocentric idea of wilderness as something beyond humans, and you're finding a wilderness where humans and the land are integrated. And I know in one spot you said that wilderness isn't just about places; it's about traditions. I thought that was
Hmm.
a really beautiful way to put it.
Hmm.
So yeah, what's wilderness look like?
Yeah, so forgotten traditions or traditions that are not in the view of what everyone thinks is actually important or actually necessary. So yeah, the cool thing about when you do have a subject that really moves you as an artist. I mean, I can probably at the end of this conversation have five more different definitions or points of view of access, axial entry points into wilderness. But to start, yeah, I mean, it is about it's not just location based, a site based that what people don't see, right? But photography is very famous for that as well. There's a
Mm,
exhibitionist or voyeur aspect of bringing images back to people in the East from the West during, Manifest Destiny times.
yeah.
So that there's that. But then also photography works as a warrior in intimate spaces as well. So people have made great careers off of inside spaces that people don't see from the outside.
Mm,
So wilderness in this aspect are definitely the traditions of people who we may not know of,
mhm.
and it's no different to say I'm going to Antarctica than it is in my case to say I'm going to go live with indigenous folks.
Right, right.
It's a sociological and a geological understanding of like, well, that's a little bit further, a little off of an edge there. And so yeah, wilderness encompasses that for me. That means thoughts and cosmologies and
Yeah.
all of these things that are not readily available, but they're, or let's say readily at hand,
Hmm.
as opposed to available, because these things exist
Yeah.
and you can get to them. But at hand is like they're not being prepared for you or brought to you as one of the options that are viable for understanding anything. I mean,
Right.
we're talking about an ecological thing, but even like, and obviously food is part of ecology, but just recipes. Um,
Right.
so there's just different ways of just cooking or heating your home. Yeah, so I do feel like when I'm in that part of the country that I'm a little bit off radar, uh, but we live in a time period that I teach English to the MISAC folks, and I mean, everybody's got a cell phone.
Yeah.
So what does so that also brings up the complexity of wilderness, which is, but what does that actually mean to be off the grid?
Yeah.
If I go somewhere where ideas might not be at hand to people back at home, but those same folks that I'm spending time with, they have ready access to what's happening outside of their community
Right.
as well.
Right. That's so interesting. I would think another kind of spot for some wild interactions is also, like you said, you're teaching English, so you're working
Mm.
across linguistic boundaries as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I wonder, I mean, I like that there was a part in sketches that showed you teaching English. And it's just like, oh, it's so weird to hear an English lesson in Spanish, because I've heard Spanish lessons in English, taking Spanish
Sure.
classes growing up. It's like, oh, that's just the way that must kind of expand your mind to take that perspective. So I wonder, is this part of why you chose Colombia because you had a familiarity with that type of Spanish? Or how did you end up in Colombia? Why
Yeah.
why there? Why those people?
Great question. It's a mixture of obviously things that happen, that you can't plan, but also
Right.
taste. Um, I lived in France when I was younger, so I speak French, and now Spanish is my
Hmm.
third language. I liked the sound of Colombian Spanish.
Hmm.
My wife, she has a place in Jackson Heights in Queens, and it must be 50% of the population of Jackson Heights are Colombians, and we can
Hmm.
buy Colombian products at the shops and everything.
Oh.
And me coming from the East Coast, I grew up in a Puerto Rican neighborhood, so I've always heard Spanish. But it was Colombian Spanish that I like the sound of it.
Hmm.
I've even heard people from Spain say if they had to learn the Latin American Spanish, like Colombian Spanish is
Oh.
up high on their list.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it's a proper kind of Spanish. Well, in the way that there's just a lot of forms that are used that just sound very formal. That a lot of people might say, well, why do they use the really formal version to say you? But they do. They say
Huh.
usted all the time
Huh.
in Colombia, and there's long reasons for it. But yeah, there's a certain clarity in the Spanish that I was attracted to. So that's one thing. Second thing was I came across a newspaper article about the varieties of shaman organizations, particularly
Hmm.
one called Canuck. It's an acronym. And Colombia has a small indigenous population of 2 or 3%, but it's got a very large network of them.
Oh,
So
interesting.
really big conversations here about, indigenous rights and
Right.
sovereignty and sustainability and all of that. And
Hmm.
so when I found out about that, because I got my second master's from Union Theological Seminary, they have an institute for Earth Institute, and there's a small little department called the Original Caretakers, and so those folks are all connected to the different shamanic practices or leaders in these different groups from around the world. And so I
Hmm.
just called up the seminary, went to go visit, and there was a contact in Colombia, and then made my way to this particular tribe and was able to come back and continue the conversation with them that I had started with them 3 years ago when I first came to explore my options of coming down to Colombia.
Right, right. Interesting. How cool. Good connections. Yeah, Union Theological Seminary, it seems like such a great school. Because it's never just that people learn some stuff there. It's always like building connections and building community. And so yeah, that seems like a cool spot. And that was your second master, so you had your MFA first.
Yeah, I got an MFA in photography and media from Cal Arts, California
Right.
Institute of the Arts. Very much, if anybody's seen Fame, and I know Fame from the 80s, I'm 45 years old, so I grew up watching Fame, but I know there's newer iterations, and Cal Arts is very much that, you walk
Hmm.
down the hallways and you see a couple and they are arguing, and you're like, oh my God, he's about to hit her, and then it's scene. You're
Right.
like, whoa! And like people are literally dancing on the tables. So coming out of a fashion photography background for me, and then going and saying I'm going to concentrate myself to like doing art. Cal
Right.
Arts allowed me to learn to become a director with all the different types of mediums and art that exists. So that was great. But great thing, real quick, about spending those 2 years, working, full time as an artist. You might go in there and you have certain conversations, maybe because
Hmm.
that's what you feel you need to talk about, or maybe that's the style of what's being talked about. But the real work is work, and then you'll find out that all those rational things that you were like going for, the stuff that keeps showing up in each one of your pieces, that's when you have to stop and say, oh yeah, why do I need that every time? And so what was showing up in all of my pieces, it doesn't matter if I was doing a piece called Cathedral, where it was about the relationship between Black male body, history, and architecture.
Hmm.
I always have a ritual section.
Hmm.
So if I had ritual, I was like, I had a great time those 2 years at Cal Arts, but I don't think anybody was able to talk to me about ritual and,
Right.
in the larger sense, liturgy, in a way. So I went to Union Theological Seminary because they had a theology in the arts program, and I was very much able to really concentrate on this liturgical impulse that was always showing up in my work.
That's cool. That's, when people wonder if they should get into a graduate program, I'm like, God, that's exactly the kind of motivation. You're like, something keeps coming up, and I have like this question about it. Where can I go to dive into that and really explore it? And that's just the best justification. So I know it's a
That's
question for a lot of people. What should I do?
mhm.
You have an
Yeah.
undergrad degree, maybe you already have another master's, and what should I do next? And I was like, well, don't don't get a degree because you think it's gonna help you get money. It depends, especially like what, like I've degrees in like philosophy. Like, that's
Yeah.
not don't do it for the money and the fame.
Well, I mean, that's why I was attracted to you. We're part of the same club. I've got an MFA
Yeah,
in art, and I have an MA in theology in the arts. That gets you what?
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
You
But
just
I'm
got to
happy I
flash
did.
your badge and be like, "Oh, I didn't realize."
Exactly. No, but seriously, for and obviously when we're talking about art and the history of art, we have to remember that shift that took place during the Renaissance, where before you were an artisan and you were making things,
Right.
right? But when the Renaissance came, it was artisan who
Mm,
thinks, so
hmm.
like the artist is definitely someone who is still dealing with our senses, right? But at the same time, it really is like a very thinking and I hope to say I love to look at it for me as a mystical expression and pathway as well. So I shout out to both of the schools that I went to because I really don't know what I would be thinking or doing at this time if I didn't have dedicated
Hmm.
years and teachers to say no, that thing that you got to get out of you, that's quite valid. We may not understand it 100%, but we want you to be able to have the tools for you to understand it so you can go forward onto your path.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, really well said. And you can definitely see it in sketches. It's a very clear sense of a world where art and ecology and spirituality are kind of blending. And I appreciate, especially that's not explicit. You're not just like the way like an anthropologist would kind of describe the here's this people, here's their religious practices and stuff. It's
Right.
all it's all just kind of implicit, but really is conveyed as kind of the feeling tone. um, so I wonder, for the final project, you're thinking of also having a book with it. It'll be a book and a film. What are you
Yeah,
envisioning?
yeah, that's I was at Strand Books in New York. Strand Books is one of the I mean, there's good bookstores in the world, but like a known big name, kind of
Right.
like what Amoeba Records is in the Bay Area or in LA. I never can come to California without going to Amoeba. New York has Strand Books,
Hmm.
and that's the kind of place where you go, you get lost in the books. You start with a theme and you come out with a completely different title, but it's also an inspiration. And I didn't think that I was going to be making a book, but I've been moved to say no. I think a good platform for the still photography is definitely a book, and because I write along with the images, then that I think that's going to be great as far as context. And then obviously still I want to do a time-based piece. So today, as we're speaking, yes, it looks like I'm going towards compiling images for a book. But I also work a lot with performance and movement. I
Hmm.
love to go see contemporary dance coming out of the postmodern movement in the 60s of the Judson
Hmm.
dance theater. And so I'm very much into body, obviously, because I already mentioned liturgy and ritual. So yeah, it's more to see where we're going to go with it. But yeah, at this time, I'm really when I go back to Sylvia in 2 weeks, I'm going to pull out the still camera primarily and see what
Hmm.
that does for me for the 9 weeks that I'll be there this time around.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing. I mean, whatever comes of it. I really like the idea of being able to share sketches, and because who knows what the final project will look like, but you'll be able to kind of sense, oh no, it was there in the sketches, and then
Yeah,
just evolves over time and might turn into a film and a book.
yeah.
Um, Also, the soundtrack was great. I remember you mentioned you didn't do it for this, but you have done music for some of your other projects. So yeah, how did this soundtrack come together?
So a good friend of mine who I grew up with from high school days, Carlos Dangler. Um, Yeah, Carlos, great actor and musician. And then I'll just say it really quickly. He was the lead, the founding bass player for Interpol, which is a band that I loved. When in my right after college days, and yeah, Carlos is just a great musician, and so he's been doing new age style of music, but without the sentimentality of Yanni, if anybody knows who that is.
That's a
But
great reference.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and I'm very proud of him, because I'll go over to his place and listen to what he's doing. And it's just kind of like, I remember we grew up in Jersey, up the road from Princeton University. And so Princeton Record Exchange is still another one of those great digging in the great crates kind of like record stores. And it was really cool growing up in that Trenton, Princeton area. And I just, very proud of him because I just remember going through and going through records. I played drums, he played guitar. So then all these years later, I mean, I've known him for 30 years to be able to still be asked to come over and say, "Hey, man, I made some new music." The one thing I do appreciate about being an artist is that we've professionalized our childhood.
Mm,
So being able to go over to a friend's house just for the sake of just let's listen to some new music that
right.
I made, it's something that I cherish. And so when I sat down and I heard it, it was like I think that's what I need.
Mm,
I think that's what I need. I think I need some mystery, some movement, and just a lot of the elements. And I hope I did a good
yeah.
job of matching up music from an album that he has already done that's out, but to matching up the certain elements with the visuals that I put together.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah, because it really had me wondering while I was watching it. Because I was like, oh, this is really nice. If you just mute it, it's still a really beautiful film. But then when you have that sound, yeah, it's very moving. And so I kept kind of just wondering, oh, huh, I wonder where's this coming from?
Yeah.
How cool. I love that idea of professionalizing your childhood.
Oh yeah.
That's such a great way to think about it.
That's all it is, man.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think anybody can make their career professionalization of childhood. That's pretty good. I
Yeah.
can see that being the case for things like philosophy. It's like, well, when you're young, you ask questions.
Oh
I
yeah.
just want to keep asking questions and it's like, can I do that for a living?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's good. That's good advice for anybody. What kind of career should you choose? Whatever you can do to professionalize your childhood.
No, 100%, 100%. And I can't remember which philosopher said it. Maybe it was Proust, but he said if you lose your friends, you lose a part of your memory.
Mm,
So being able to work on a project with someone that I've known for 30 something years, and also just like what you just said, you're just making me think of like, my teacher, when I was Miss Green, when I was in first, second, and third grade, she just called me Mr. Philosopher. So I must have been asking questions, but then asking questions maybe out of turn because I also had a lot of detentions and stuff too. But yeah, yeah, no,
that's
it's
funny.
about yeah, it's about continuing who you are. And many of us have different paths that we have to go down to. So I feel immensely blessed to be able to be here in Colombia. I always questioned if I could learn the third language. I did a really good
Mm,
job with French. And it's kind of like, I work on my Spanish every single day. I have class every morning. I'm at the university. And so
wow.
it's like, yeah, I'm seeing parts of myself. So tying that into what you were saying about teaching the English, I mean, I'm in school learning Spanish. I'm teaching English to an indigenous tribe. And what I believe really ingratiated me to them was when I came and I said, it's not about you guys learning English so that you can step up to be a part of our so-called mature or industrial economy. No, no, it's about you guys being able to express what it is that you have
Hmm.
on a platform that is right now English as a lingua franca. And for indigenous folks, Spanish is their lingua franca because all of their languages are not mutually intelligible.
Right.
So their language is a big, big theme in this as well. So we'll see how that develops also. But yes, I mean, just the fact of like sharing language it means sharing of oneself and sharing of one's culture and sharing of one's personalities. So that kind of like give and take is part of what that relationship and the trust that's actually happening between me and the Misak people as well.
Right. So are you learning much of the Misak language? Is that in the mix at all?
No, one language at a time.
Yeah, that's a
Spanish is
lot.
hard.
Yeah.
Spanish is a little bit more complicated as you get further. It's a little bit more complicated than French on
Mm.
the grammar level.
Oh,
So, and then also there's a great library at the Misak University. Most of it's written in their language. And the
hmm.
cool thing is that the Misak are one of the fewer tribes that actually have their language completely intact.
Right.
So the students they speak the language because they learn it at home, but on Fridays and Saturdays they're learning reading and writing of the language, and then they study English with us on Sunday.
Wow.
So
Wow. So
so
those kids are growing up with all kinds of linguistic diversity.
and ways of seeing
Yeah.
and everything. The pandemic for them was a different
Mm.
experience because they felt confident in medicinal medicine, traditional
Oh,
medicinal medicine, plants,
right.
plantas medicinales. And so when I go into the library and I read about 2 to 3 times a week, I only really have access, obviously, to the books that they have written in Spanish.
Right.
But none of their classes that they're teaching are in Spanish. So that's a big question is if I'm
Hmm.
going to make the leap into learning a derivative of a Quechua
Okay, right.
language from the Andes. But there is plenty of material in Spanish, and then everyone who I'm with, they're completely bilingual in Spanish and in their language. So we'll see if not saying that these are my heroes, but we'll see if the Lewis and Clark way of having 3 to 4 interpreters to get to the language. We'll
Right.
see if that gets me to what it is that I'm looking for, and also well, what's wrong with that kind of transitioning anyway
Hmm.
between languages, and what about those spaces that are actually there that's not so direct as well. Because when and we'll probably get to talking about this, but when we're talking about like these ideas of cartography and making one's way and mapping, it's not about, again, perfect objective uh, 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 um, translation. Uh,
Right.
And it's also about, well, how does somebody in New York, or my hope, a teenager who connects with a teenager at the Misak University, how do they find their way in Fort Greene, Brooklyn to concepts of ecology? And that's not necessarily going to be the Google one-to-one translation. So that's also a part of it as well. So I don't feel so pressed that I'm not going to get the essence if I don't have exactly their language. Those are all of the premonitions, or I'm sorry, the first steps of what this very first year has been, to see what is focus, what needs to be carried on, or what can be what it is
Hmm.
in all of these relationships.
Yeah, that's nice. I like the point about translation, the Lewis and Clark model. Like, yeah, when you're doing this kind of work, you have to be aware of the limitations of some of those ideas and that, yeah, that whole idea of, oh, I'll get the pure essence of them. Like, no, that's not really something you can access, and trying to is kind of a colonial move. Oh, I'll get your pure essence. I'm like, oh, that doesn't
Yeah.
sound respectful. Yeah, and cartography is a great example. It reminds me of thinking about rivers on a map. It's like, well,
Mm,
rivers change all the time. They swell, they diminish, and then the map's just like, well, here's one little snapshot.
mhm.
And so, of course, that's different than what it actually looks like, because in reality, it's dynamic, it's moving. One map could never possibly tell you the full truth of a river.
Yeah, yeah. And you're already giving me like the idea of like, so what is the difference between the scenes that you see in sketches where you actually have moving drone scenes that could be considered beginnings of maps, or me using the drone and doing still photography? So there's a question between a permanence or the supposing permanence
Yeah.
to something that's actually moving. And I believe that when you get into this is probably where obviously a little bit more investigation in the language could very be helpful because what does directions mean
Mm,
in indigenous language? But again, I'm for anybody who knows the European levels of A1, A2 for language, I'm at the end of my B2. And the next is C1, and I'm not prepared to do A1 in Misak language as of yet, but I am very interested in because it's a Colombian needing of awakening to its own folks that even the step from indigenous language to Spanish itself is like if that is something that I can actually be a part of
yeah.
and witness and be a part of the documentation of the importance of Colombians actually seeing the importance of their own heritage, which is an indigenous heritage, that is a lot of translation and important work done already as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting. I'm terrible with languages because I wanted to like learn a bunch. So I'd like do like an intro class for like all the things. And so I'm
Yeah.
not, I'm fluent in English, but I've got that down pretty good. But aside from that, yeah, Spanish is terrible. I'm like, I can pick out a few words, but then I was like, oh, but I want to learn French. And then I got into like German philosophy, so I said some German. And then for some reason thought, oh, if I learn Latin, that could help piece all this together. It's the roots. And so yeah, I'm just like 101 kind of level with everything, so I have so much respect for people who can kind of just switch between languages, or even just being in a place where there's a lot of languages being spoken. That's just so
Hmm.
complex, and
It is.
just really exciting for the creative possibilities there.
It is, and it's also it's interesting how different minds navigate it because about 5 months ago, and I speak fluent French. I couldn't speak French to save my life. I mean,
Hmm,
every other word was Spanish coming out when I was
right,
trying to have a French conversation. I attribute that to being an artist and automatically coming into this world to break down some kind of wall. And
right.
so the so the compartmentalization for me is what I'm actually restitching back together. I went to go get a French speaking tutor who can speak Spanish so they can catch all the Spanish words that were coming out of my mouth when we're supposedly having French conversations.
Right.
So, so my own travel through this, I mean, there was so many books on ecology, integral ecology. I wanted to read Eduardo Kahn's How Forests Think. So many books that I have that I just did not read last year because I was like, man, I can't split it up between English, French, and Spanish. I just gotta do Spanish for a year.
Yeah.
So now I'm actually, if I can just share real fast, How Forests Think is on my list. Interpreting nature, the emerging fields of environmental hermeneutics, and you and I have talked about Gadamer and hermeneutics before. I'm finishing a book called The Lore of the Local by Lucy Lithard, and she is an art writer, but is getting into concepts of place versus space, which is also really core to this work as well. And so those books I'm actually getting into this year because I'm not so strict on myself about not allowing other influences come in because I knew what would happen, which did happen, which my cataloging skills they get a little messy
Yeah.
um, during the process. But that being said, very much looking forward to getting back to the Misak folks in just 2 weeks and coming with this new kind of view after making sketches and really seeing like what I was moved by, hearing other people what they're moved by, sharing it with the indigenous when I get back and see how they can be a part of this speculative documentary work as well as their own storytellers, their own sharers of tradition that I can come and be a part of. So it's not just from me coming in as the outsider coming in and arranging, but like, what do you guys think art is? What,
Mhm.
what do you think art about ecology is? Like, those are my next round of questions in 2 weeks, as soon as I get back to the students.
I'll be really, really curious. Uh, yeah, that's such a cool project, and it's it's so fraught with complexities that seems like you're navigating in a really creative way. Because that's one of them is the thing like, oh, I'll go in and I'll tell you what these things mean. Instead, you're like, well, no, that's obviously a terrible way to interact with
Yeah.
indigenous people. It's like, well, then I guess then we should just not interact. Like, no, well, we need to have these kind of cross-cultural interactions, and how do you do it respectfully?
Yeah.
And it seems like you're just nailing it, including the fact that you're teaching as part of it, like you're interacting with the community in a way where you're doing service. So I just think
Yeah.
this all seems like the way to do it.
Well, I'm not ashamed to say, look, man, I pray a lot, I meditate a lot. I follow mystical guide points, rational guide points, material signposts to how am I supposed to get through this? And that's that. That's my way of working. I hope more people can work like that, especially in the arts,
Yeah.
but in all fields as well. But yeah, it's just making leaps of faith into areas and then hoping that you have enough with you to bring things forward, but then also that you have enough openness inside yourself to allow things to come in, and that nice uh, Kierkegaardian tightrope, is really really how I have been doing for a while. This is not my first time doing this type of work. Uh, working at lens based, but having the veneer or the aesthetics of a documentary means being in communication with folks. And it's always a good feeling when the work that you do with folks, they come back and they say that was a representation that I stand by. As well. And we have enough
Yeah.
history. We have enough, filmmakers and stuff to see what they were doing, like the Jean Rouches of the world, and audience out there, if you don't know who I'm talking about exactly, but there's so many great filmmakers and experimental documentarians, and folks have been doing this for such a long time, and they have gone through things and made mistakes that I hope that my generation and future generations can say, well, maybe the protagonists don't feel as representative. And there's many stories of people who worked on a project and then they came back and they became their own filmmakers because they
Hmm.
wanted to do a better job than the outsider that came to tell their story in the first place.
Hmm.
So, I don't mind dropping the Jean Rouche names or anybody, in different spaces, because again, I really do believe that interdisciplinary doesn't mean just academically
Yeah.
interdisciplinary. We need to be pulling all of our different fields of expression and research and all these things together to help us tell a communal story and hopefully a better story at the end of the day.
Nice. Yeah. Really well said. And I don't know, I just feel like big people talk about interdisciplinary stuff, and it often just means like in some university context where somebody works with biology and chemistry, and like
Right.
that's the extent of it. And then it's like they're not even getting to the humanities, they're not getting to the arts, they're not getting outside of the university. And it's even the way positions are given, it's hard to get a job in academia if you are interdisciplinary. Because they're like, what do you do? Are you this? Are you this? You're like, oh, I do all of that. They're like, ah, sorry. We only have these little boxes for you. So it's one of the really exciting things I think about your work is it's easily seen as so interdisciplinary, really crossing a lot. You're thinking about ecology, sustainability. You're thinking about theology and mysticism, and then you're working. Even the fact that you do photography, you also do film. You just really that speaking of the Renaissance, it's like that really is the legacy of like people who
Mm-hmm.
were really kind of doing everything,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's what I think integral ecology is really all about.
Yeah, that's why I'm so into integral ecology. I mean, I come from a General Motors family, but I don't think like somebody on the assembly line.
Right.
And it really comes down, when we're talking about art and we're talking about artists and we're talking about personalities, like my mom's a classically trained singer. So, I was into Beethoven and Mozart, just like I was into hip hop and into, straight edge music like Minor Threat and Bad Brains.
Nice.
Growing up in the 90s was like, oh, we got genres, we got categories, you can't cross
Hmm.
those things. So, I'm proud of myself for saying, but I can't turn off what I like. I can't turn off what I see.
Yeah.
And integral ecology is really giving us a platform to say, hey, the way that we orient ourselves through the world, the way that we look at animals, guess what? What do we say about animals in our poetry? What do we say
Yeah.
about animals in our movies? What do we say about animals in our laws? So all of these different domains are expressions of where we're situated as people, as humans, as societies. And so, yeah, integral reading about integral ecology, reading your writings and everything has definitely given a lot of material for me to work with that I've always felt. But you gotta, we're always working on. That's why I like working with dancers. Their primary thing is to deal with the Cartesian, split,
Right.
and so it's like it's mind and body, but there's also mind, body, and the spiritual and the art and sciences and all these things that need to come together. So I just find these conversations of ecological hermeneutics and integral ecology as being integral to what it is that I'm needing as a maker, as far as being a maker right now.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I like that book, Interpreting Nature, a lot. I'm actually teaching it in a class this fall.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, big fan. And I don't know, hermeneutics. It doesn't get as much attention as it should because it's not edgy. It's just like a sensible way of thinking about things. And so we were like, that's no good. But I think applying those kind of thoughts to ecology is really helpful because you can just see all the perspectives, science, art, mind, body, spirit, and you can just the beauty of a thing really starts to unfold as you see how many different ways there are to contemplate it.
Yeah, yeah. And the way that our lives unfold, I think people have miraculous stories in their lives about how they've navigated life and how they've gotten to places, even if they don't want to use the word miracles, if even if they don't pray, or but there's these synchronicities.
Yeah,
And I think that when we start looking at our fields of investigation as like a form of discovering synchronicities,
yeah,
um, you know, I I, I think that's when we can bring the awe, or and people may disagree with the term sublime, but whatever these feelings are that can be transcendental or out of our own perspective, that kind of creates a feeling or sentiment of unity and purpose with everything that's around. That's what really led me to honing in on. And I grew up Christian and I practice Zen Buddhism, and Buddhism has great things to say about ecology. But I have to say, my favorite theologian is Vine Deloria Jr.
mm,
And just from that Native American aspect, like how he critiqued East and West religion, like, yeah, but they're still charismatic. Like, whoa, like they're still charismatic. There's still a person in Buddhism, and it's true. Like I sit down and meditate. I go to the I go to the sangha, to the temple, and like there's a statue of Buddha. Like, oh, there's a charismatic example of what we're doing. And I was just like, so what's the non-charismatic? What is the non anthropocentric? And I've found it with indigenous folks and have yet to really discover like how do I actually express that, and how to express direction into that in a lens based medium.
yeah, yeah. I like it a lot, and especially, I mean, some of the things, just how the word sublime might trip people up, or purpose, unity, and things like that. And you're able to evoke all that without having to say all those words. Like those words can really get in the way. And so doing, lens-based media, those feelings come up. So people have that, oh, I feel connected, I feel that's the sense of unity here, or sense of purpose. without getting hung up on the words. I'm primarily word based in everything I do, so I
Mhm.
have a lot of respect for people who can convey things without them, because it's so hard to, especially with something as complicated as working with indigenous traditions. The language can get really difficult. Even just
Mhm.
speaking English, I'm like, well, I'm obviously missing so much about your tradition. But then just showing pictures with evocative music and the movement, and you're able to really convey a whole world. Um, so I wonder, what's the timeline for when can I? Because you left me wanting more. You can't just show sketches and be like, yeah, it'll be 10 years or something before the final project's out.
Sure,
So
sure. No, I'm on the James Turrell, Rodin's creator timeline. So he's been working on this for 30 years now.
right.
It still hasn't opened. I'm still waiting for the announcement come to Flagstaff, Arizona, because finally we're done. No, huge respect for James Turrell. I mean, obviously those conversations that he had coming from a Quaker background, I feel very connected to that
Mm,
type of an artist. I feel connected to an artist like Andy Goldsworthy.
mm,
So yeah, speaking about timeline, my astrological sign is a Taurus, so I'm
mm,
pretty good at being on time. I'm pretty
mm,
good at knowing how long things should take. Both times I was in grad school, they were 2 years, and I got done what I needed to get done. I just knew I had to learn a whole new language, so I set the time for 3 years.
mm,
So I have completed one of 3 years. So dealing with visas, I'm on a voluntary visa now. So I actually work with a organization. So that's how I was able to get here this second time around. When I first came, it was on a tourist visa, and I got an
mm,
apartment with a full lease and everything. And
mm.
when we went back, my wife and I went back to New York to get married June 18th. We didn't have a visa to come back, so we weren't sure if we were going to be able to come back to our home here, but it worked out. And so again, we'll have to deal with that when that comes up in the future. But I have a visa now until June of next year, and
Mm.
I plan on doing a lot of work, obviously. And so, yes, it's 3 years for me. We're one of three. And so hopefully these deeper, uh, let's say, encounters,
Mm.
because I'm never going to want to profess knowing the Misak
Mm.
in that kind of way. I know what it means to be a Black American. I have a sense of what it means to be a person of color in France because I lived there for 2 years. Um, so maybe the knowing aspect is just a little too all encompassing. But I would hope that at the end of 2 years that I will have had enough rich experiences
Mhm.
that, again, back to the translation, maybe I'm not speaking Quechua and I'm speaking kind of metaphorically, but the English that I'm speaking or the Spanish that I come to learn to speak that gets transmitted through the art that is being made, and it allows people to have the space to be able to start to create their own maps towards that kind of understanding of subjecthood of all things that we share in our existence.
Nice. That's exciting. All right, well, I'll hold you to that timeline. So if it's not out, I'll be bothering you.
No, pressure is good. Having a date is good. I
Yeah.
got I got married 1 year to the day after I proposed. So
Oh,
yeah. So having a like, okay, we're going to do this by this time. It does put it puts some great energy into I don't want to say forcing myself, but focusing oneself
yeah.
to produce and to bring something out to be able to share that's worthy of sharing.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. That means for your yearly anniversary, it's the anniversary of your engagement as well as of getting married. Smart. That's a good idea.
I didn't really do it on purpose, but it ended up working out that
Oh,
way. But
funny.
yeah. Those are the miracles.
Yeah.
Artists, we tend to try to ride on those because it's not a 9 to 5 job at the end of the day. So everything has to be a bit miraculous and extraordinary for us to keep going on with what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, right. Finding synchronicities.
Exactly, finding synchronicities.
Well, I can't imagine a better note to end on than synchronicities and a wonderful love story.
Ah,
Geez, Andre, thanks so much for being here and for sharing stuff with us. And I'll have to have you back on when the project is done, and we'll celebrate.
thank you so much, Sam. Appreciate it so much.
Cool. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be back with some more conversations later. But in the meantime, take care and be well.
Bye, everyone.